Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 17th of August of 2026. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first let's talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians have improved their positions significantly. First let's talk about the Zaporizhzhia direction. According to the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, in the group of forces east, the Russians, as a result of clashes, established complete control over the settlement by the name of Novosoloshyne. So this is the village that was captured by Russians, and these are the changes on the ground. This is the end of the 17th of August, and this is the end of the previous day of the 16th of August of 2026. The pro-Russian sources published a video where we can see how exactly the clashes were taking place for the settlement. We can see how the Russians were bombing, we can see an artillery preparation, and of course during the final part of this video we can see at least two episodes where Russians raised their Russian flag. So based on this video we have adjusted the map, and this is a very important settlement. This is the second settlement along TO408 road, and now we see that the Russians began moving in the southern direction. The Russians are trying to attack in the southern direction along TO408 road, and most likely with these roads of attacks the Russians would try to shorten the distances and to approach the settlement of Amelnik from the north. Furthermore, the village of Mykilske is a very important village in this area, and obviously the Russians are tasked to take this village under complete control as well, because if you take a look at this village we can see that there is a road TO408 and the Russians cut this road physically, but there is a road by the number without number, as we can see, but there is a road, this one, that goes between the settlements of Novotroitsk and Mykilske that the Ukrainians also can use for the logistic purposes. So that is why if Russians take this village also under complete control, this will lead probably to complete collapse of Ukraine's logistics in the area of the city of Orikhiv. So right now there are very heavy clashes in this area. I would like to remind you that according to different sources, the Russians have introduced additional forces in this area. The new commander-in-chief of the armed forces, Andriivka, did the same. So there are lots of forces both from the Russian and from the Ukrainian side, and we enter the most decisive, the vital phase of the battle for the city of Orikhiv. And don't forget that the Russians also continue advancing through the city of Orikhiv itself. During the previous weekend we received lots of updates from this area. The Russians improved their position significantly, and according to different sources, mainly according to pro-Russian sources, currently the armed forces of the Russian Federation control up to 15-20% of the city of Orikhiv, and that the Russians continue advancing. Furthermore, and also the most important thing is that during the previous 24 hours, for the first time since the beginning of the special military operation, the Russians managed to hit the Dnipro bridges directly. So this attack that took place yesterday in the evening wasn't the only attempt from the Russian side. During the previous months, the Russians made lots of attempts trying to hit and to destroy the bridges along the river of Dnipro in the area of the city of Zaporizhzhia, but the Russians were always missing the target. And this attack was the first attack when the Russians managed to damage the bridge, and as you can see in this video, we can see some problems, some damages that the Russians managed to deal to the bridge. The bridge wasn't badly damaged, but obviously the bridge was damaged. And of course, if Russians are able to carry out more strikes, like 40-50 strikes like this one, obviously the Ukrainians would lose possibilities to use this bridge for logistic purposes. Of course, and when it happens, and if it happens, this is going to be probably a complete collapse of the entire defenses and logistics of Ukraine through the Orikhiv direction. Now let's move further and let's talk about the most important direction, about a breakthrough that took place during the previous 24 hours, and we are talking about the territory between the cities of Zaporizhzhia, and Kramatorsk. And as you can see, the map has been adjusted significantly, and these are the changes on the ground between the 17th and the 16th of August of 2026. So as you can see, the Russians improved their positions through the city of Zaporizhzhia itself, and obviously the Russians enter the final phase of the battle for the city. most likely the Russians will be able to establish complete control over the settlement before the beginning of the parliament elections on the territory of Russia. And the Russians, according to the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, today captured the settlement of Andriivka Общina. And these are the changes on the ground between the dates. So, telling the truth, by the end of the 17th of August of 2026, we still haven't received anything. We're talking about videos or geolocations that can confirm that indeed the settlement under Russian control. We haven't received videos with flags or something that can give us strong proofs, but we have adjusted the map and we believe that maybe in coming days something will be published. So, but anyway, this is the statement and this is the official report of the Minister of Defense, and it's not just another settlement that was captured by Russians. This is a breach of the front line. This is basically a collapse of the front line between Druzhkivka and Dobropolye, and the distance of breakthrough is around 10 kilometers. So this is the situation by the end of the 16th, and this is the end of the 17th of August. The Russians managed to break through a front line to probably take on the complete control all these territories and to answer the settlement of Andriivka and to cut physically the TO514 road between the cities of Dobropolye and Kramatorsk. So we are talking about this road. This road used to be one of the most important roads in defenses of the cities Dobropolye and Druzhkivka, and now we see that the Russians, according to the Minister of Defense report, managed to cut this road physically. There are more lines that the Ukrainians use for logistic purposes. One of them is the road further of 543. This is the road that connects the city of Kramatorsk with the mainland, and currently this is basically the only road that Ukrainians still have and may use safely. And there are more roads to the north, like say M30 highway, but when talking about M30 highway, this road is already under complete FPV drone and fire control from the Russian side, so that is why it's unsafe to use this territory. And there is a railway and there is a road along L535, and this road probably also more or less reliable and more or less safe for Ukrainians to use. But the problem is that these roads, the next road to the north of the area of breakthrough is already under complete Russian FPV drone control, if the Russians indeed have strong control over the settlement of Andriivka, because the distance between the settlement of Andriivka and this road is already less than 13 kilometers, which means that this is nothing for FPV drones, and Russians can control this territory without problems. So with this information, and if this configuration is correct, and this is exactly what is happening right now along the line of combat contact, we can say that the settlement of Druzhkivka and the settlement of Kramatorsk are falling into the DONBASS pocket, are falling into the operational encirclement. So this is the situation in this area. We are waiting for additional proofs, so we are waiting for additional updates. One thing is clear, that most likely the next target and the next task for Russians is to cut and to take under complete control the pocket between the settlements of Dobropolye and Andriivka. We're talking about these villages. This will allow the Russians to maintain the lines, to take under complete control logistics, to improve their foothold before moving further in the northern direction, with the purpose to cut the rest of the roads. So the situation is quite critical and difficult for the armed forces of Ukraine. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Druzhkivka agglomeration. During the previous 24 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded both through the southwestern and the southeastern parts and directions. The Russians continue bombing the settlement of Druzhkivka with aviation, trying to soften defenses of the armed forces of Ukraine, while the ground forces are advancing along the rivers of Казённый Торец and Кривой Торец. So there are two rivers. This is the river of Казённый Торец and this is the river of Кривой Торец, and the Russians are advancing along both rivers. The Russians, according to neutral mappers, improved their positions significantly along the river of Казённый Торец, and the Russians answered the southern parts of the settlement of Raiska, and the Russians continue advancing. As for the river of Кривой Торец, the Russians improved their positions through the southern parts of the settlement of Alexeyevo-Druzhkivka, and currently, according to pro-Russian sources, the Russians control up to 20% of the settlement, and the Russians continue advancing. The situation is quite quite complicated for the armed forces Ukraine, especially for the units and forces who are currently located in this pocket, because sooner or later the time and the situation will force the Russians to cut the pocket or to encircle the contingent of the armed forces Ukraine through these territories. There are lots of tree lines, lots of fortifications. There is a village of Nikolaipolye, and according to different pro-Russian sources, the settlement was taken by Russians on July 9th of 2026, but yet we haven't received even a single proof of this. So let's wait and see how the things are going to develop in this area. But we see that the Russians continue advancing, and it seems that the Ukrainians are not able to stabilize or to slow down the Russians through this area. As during the previous 24 hours, the Russians continued attacking positions and forces of the armed forces of Ukraine through the cities of Kramatorsk, Slavyansk, using dozens or hundreds of drones. The Ukrainians suffer huge losses. Since the beginning of the battle for this agglomeration, the Russians have destroyed 3 of 10 bridges through these territories, so the situation is quite complicated. And don't forget that the battle for Slavyansk and Druzhkivka is not the only battle. Right now we see that there are lots of problems in the area of the city of Orikhiv, and of course there are lots of problems in the most northeastern parts of the Kharkiv region, where the Russians also continue offensive operation. The only thing and the only territory that is still covered with the gray zone is the Liman direction, because we see that the battle for the southern parts of Slavyansk-Druzhkivka accelerates, but at the same time we see nothing happens or nothing is happening, or both the Russians and the Ukrainians are trying to not to publish anything about the Liman direction, but the Liman direction is one of the most important directions as well. The only update we received probably since the beginning of August is a video published by a pro-Russian source that the Russians during the clashes managed to enter the eastern parts of the settlement Novosoloshyne. If you remember, we discussed this video on the 14th of August of 2026, where the author of this video claimed that here we can see Russian soldiers moving along the village, along this territory, but since that moment we haven't received anything else to confirm the situation in this area. So one thing is clear, that something is happening through the northern Slavyansk direction, and one thing is clear, that nobody, but neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians, are interested to reveal the real situation along the river of Seversky Donetsk around the city of Liman towards the settlement of Izum. But something important is happening here, and probably sooner or later we will find out it. Now let's move further. As for the northeastern parts of Kharkiv region, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians improved their positions. The Russians answered the settlement by the name of Kuna. This information was confirmed by the group of forces north and by this video, where we can see how Ukrainians were attacking edge positions of Russians or positions of sabotage and reconnaissance groups. The news is tightening around Ukraine's positions in this area, and according to this configuration and reports that were published by the group of forces north, we believe that the days for the most northeastern parts of Kharkiv region are numbered, and obviously before the end of September probably we won't see this pocket anymore. Another important thing worth attention, that both the Russians and the Ukrainians in the second part of 2026 are moving to new weapons and missiles and drones they use to attack each other. So you know that for a very long period of time of the special military operation, probably since the beginning of 2022, we've seen almost every single day the same weapons and the same technologies that both the Russians and the Ukrainians were using. The Russians, since the beginning of 2022, have used thousands of Geran drones of the first, second and third generations. We've seen lots of Ha-101 missiles used by Russians. We saw lots of ballistic missiles used by Russians. But the second part of 2026 shows us that both the Russians and the Ukrainians are moving to the next generation weapons. Both the Russians and the Ukrainians are focused to make their weapons cheaper and to create a massive production of these cheap weapons. For example, the Russians this year intensify the use of Banderol missiles. So this is a very important situation, and yesterday, if you remember, for the first time since the beginning of the special military operation, the Russians used 10 missiles of Banderol type during one attack. So that was the first massive attack with this type of weapon, and the Russians were attacking an airfield in the area of the settlement of Krapivnitsky, trying to destroy the airfield and not allow the Ukrainians to use the airfield for air defense purposes. But the Banderol weapon is not the only weapon that the Russians are using. For example, pro-Ukrainian sources stated that Russia is creating a mass version of the Ha-101 missile, the Banderol drone. The Ukrainians call this not a missile but a drone. This is not just another strike drone, but an attempt to put on stream a cheaper analog, fast and designed for strikes in Ukraine. That was stated by pro-Ukrainian sources. Another important thing is that the Russians accelerate production of drones like fourth generation and fifth generation, and these days the Russians also began using these drones massively. The sources reported that the Russians produce up to or more than 3,000 of drones every month, or jet-powered drones of fourth and fifth generation, and obviously these drones are very difficult to intercept according to pro-Ukrainian sources. But the thing is that the Ukrainians are also developing their technologies, and today we received the report that the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense has accepted into service the domestically developed DONBASS T-40 and drone with a range of over 2,000 kilometers. It can remain airborne for more than 24 hours. This is claimed to be sufficient for combat operations against targets in the Urals and Western Siberia. So we can see that the Ukrainians are trying to find a way how to have possibilities to attack every single part of Russia. During the testing, this drone demonstrated a number of advantages over its competitors: ultra-low radar signature, high-performance engine with electronic fuel injection, significant resistance to electronic warfare. So in coming days, we'll see these more of these drones, because we these days start receiving reports that the Russians air defense capabilities these days have increased significantly, despite the fact that the Ukrainians destroyed several warehouses on the territory of Russia, especially those that were destroyed during the last attack on the territory of the city of Moscow. We see that the Ukrainians need more and more drones to be involved in massive attacks to hit at least one building. For example, during the previous massive wave attack, the Ukrainians used around 3,000 of drones, and as a result of attack, just 2 warehouses were destroyed in the territory of Russia. So they used 3,000 of drones and they destroyed just 2 warehouses. Yeah, those warehouses were the biggest on the territory of Russia. But imagine yourself, if the Russians were using 3,000 of drones every day, how many targets would be destroyed in this case? So the Russians used 100 of drone, and these 100 is enough to destroy something similar. Another important thing is that today pro-Ukrainian sources reported that Ukrainians began using guided aerial bomb. So this is the video that was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, and according to information we have, this bomb has passed all necessary tests and is already being produced for the army. So which means that in coming days we'll see updates on this matter from the Ukrainian side. We'll see how Ukrainians use more of these bombs to attack Russian positions. The sources reported that the distance, the range, the flight range of this bomb varies from 10 to 130 kilometers. So I'm just trying to tell you that we are entering the last part of 2026, military campaign of 2026, and most likely we'll see military campaign of 2027, and it seems that we will see completely different situation to that what we can see right now. We will see more weapons, new technologies, the Russia's analog of Starlink, and many other different tools that both the Russians and the Ukrainians would use to attack each other. And that's it for today. The Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.